All right, I think we're ready to get started. And so I will kick off with a quick answer of one of these things, not like the others, and why am I up here? For those of you guys that don't know me, I'm Russell Norris. I'm the general manager here at Slalom Boston. I'm incredibly excited about tonight. I'm excited for a bunch of reasons. We're here tonight to celebrate International Women's Day, which for those of you guys who might go have to Google it and say, oh, it's not really today, it's March 8th. It's really the whole month is all about International Women's Day, and I know this because I have 3 small children, the oldest was a daughter. And you know, they said, will you be home tonight? What time will you be home? 85,000 questions, 10, 8, 4-year-old. And so my daughter asked me, and I said, well, actually tonight we're celebrating International Women's Day. And she wanted to know if that meant if she got cookies or cake or whatever. And so I said, yes, all of that. Mom will be home to take care of that. But the reality is, it was actually a great conversation about what the power is in doing things. Really the focus that we've got on making it happen, right, which is the theme for 2015 International Women's Day, which is about all of us coming together and talking about amazing women doing amazing things. And the opportunity we have as a group to make this feasible. Right? International Women's Day is not just about women, it's about the capability of all of us to be inclusive and to make an environment that allows people to bring their whole selves to work, for us to understand what those opportunities are, and to drive the connectivity, the capability. How do we come together collectively to make sure that women feel comfortable in a place that they can aspire and grow and bring that to the table? And so we'll talk about a lot of different stuff. We've got an amazing group of panel here. And I'm pretty excited about what Carol, Deb, Susan, and Meredith will bring to us. So thank you guys for coming tonight. Carol will introduce them as we go through it. I will wrap up a little bit at the end. But my ask for all of you is this only works if we're engaged. All of this on a bigger scale works if we're engaged. So tonight is a continuation of that action and that vision. So bring it all, listen to what they have to say, feel free to challenge and ask and make this your own. So thank you guys all, and thanks to Angela and Emma and the group for putting this together. Our local Boston chapter on the women's side is really passionate about these things. This is our 3rd year in moving forward. In our first International Women's Day, we had a few people in that conference room who said, not really sure what we're doing, but it seems important, and to go from there to here is phenomenal. So thank you all. Give yourselves a hand, and thank you.
Well, hi, my name is Carol McMullen, as Russell had said, and I have the pleasure of working with Slalom Boston as the senior advisor. I'm not going to read the bios to you. My assumption is that anyone who's in this room can read. And these are all women of tremendous skill, and I want you to know that it's on a piece of paper in front of you, which also has some very interesting statistics on the back, some of which we will touch on, some of which we won't. This is the first, what we've done in the last 3 years is the first year was really establishing Slalom Women's Connect and making sure that women have a place to come at Slalom to be together and learn. In the second year, I think we built relationships, we built trust, we got to know one another. We brought in some women from the senior people around town, of whom there are a couple in the room, who spoke with the women and began to talk about what their careers had been, what their careers are, and some of the issues and problems they'd seen. And in the 3rd year, which is this year, it's really about what are the skills we need and what are the talents that we have to develop to get ourselves into leadership positions at Slalom and every place else. I'd like to particularly welcome the men in the room. I know not everybody's married, and not everybody who's a man is married to a woman. I know not everybody has children, and if they have children, they don't have girls. But the last time I looked, you all had mothers. And until technology changes a lot, that's highly likely to remain with us. And I think the role of women oftentimes are reduced to what is the role in terms of having children and bearing children. And I think if you look at these statistics, one of those interesting reasons, women don't leave work for work-life integration more than about a quarter of the time. That's not the primary reasons they cite for leaving. It's a lot of other reasons. So it has nothing, it's not all about having kids and raising children. And I think the other piece of this is, there's a thing called the girl effect. And the girl effect is, well, 80% of all the people in the world who are literate are women. 80% of the people who are not in school after the 5th grade around the world are girls. And the reason is because after 5th grade in most big countries like India and places in Africa, you pay to go to school, and if you're only paying for one child, you tend to pay for the son, not the daughter. But for every year beyond the 5th grade that a girl stays in school, she earns another 25%. For every year of financial literacy she has, in addition to that, she earns another 25%. And women give back between 96 and 98% of all the money they earn to themselves and their family. Men ranges from 75 to 80%. They drink it, they eat it, they play it. That's not the case with women around the world. And so the girl effect is actually not about all those things I just said. What it is that girls who achieve sons who think differently about women. And that's what changes the world. And so this concept of all being together and everyone thinking about this holistically, if there's nothing else you remember, it's one, that you had a mother, and she'd be glad you were here. And secondly, that really it's the girl effect and the transition to next generations of diversity and open thinking that really changes the world. And so that's another thing that you all here if you take that forward. We're going to start the panel right now. As I said, I'm not going to introduce them. I'm going to tell you some fun facts about them. I've known these women for varying amounts of time and in varying in different ways. Very talented group. Dr. Susan Swick is a psychiatrist. And you can read, Mass General, Midwestern Hospital, all these wonderful things that she has done professionally in her life. So she's recommended sort of for us the academic and the medical side of professionalism. Meredith Ripley is I call her a serial entrepreneur, has been involved in technology for a many period of time. You can read her resume. And again, I think Meredith is really looking at, she's a CEO of a company and she's been a CEO before. So really looking at women in technology, women in entrepreneurship, women running businesses. And Deb Ray is really from the not-for-profit world and has a long and storied career really in not-for-profit, including right now being the head of Big Sister of Boston, which is the only Big Sister organization nationally that has not merged with Big Brother Big Sister and has been able to remain independent and do what it does without merging with Big Brother. So again, they all have very interesting things. I'm going to ask 2 or 3 questions. And we're going to kind of talk a little bit amongst ourselves, and then we're going to open it up to questions with you. Does that seem okay with you? Okay. But let me just, Susan is. Susan actually, I think she puts in her bio a couple of things. She has 4 children under 12, 2 boys and 2 girls. Her husband is also a physician. He works in the ER, runs the ER in Brigham, right?
He is in the pediatric emergency room at Tufts.
And so comes from a background of mothers and grandmothers who worked both as physicians and in business. And, I've known Susan long enough to know when she says this thing about getting thrown out of Bible camp when she was 11. I'm sure it's true, and we probably don't want to know what happened. Meredith Ripley, really very interesting, just entrepreneur her whole life. She had Emmy Awards being held at her wedding because a game show television producer, a friend of hers, created the show 10K Pyramid, and he had an Emmy, so everybody had the picture taken with the Emmys. And if you think she's not intelligent, she's related to both Max Planck and Angela Merkel. So I guess there's
Thanks to Ancestry.com.
There's some genes there that probably are going along. Now, actually, Deborah and I share a very strong passion, which most of you aren't old enough to know, although if you're really young, you probably do know, which is the hula hoop. She actually has competed in hula hoop championships. I love the hula hoop, but I have never competed. She also was the captain of her street hockey team and grew up the youngest with 5 older brothers. I have 4 brothers, so we also share that. But my favorite thing is, as a freshman in college, she won the bean spinning contest. Which is getting the first jelly bean in a glass standing 10 feet away. Now, for guys, if you got a hole in one in golf, you think that's pretty good, but I think this is totally different. So you not only have women of intellect and success, but women with a sense of humor, and who are going to be able to provide you some great information. Our first topic is grit and resiliency. Now, this is not a topic amongst women. This is a topic about leadership. This is a topic about survival. And we're going to let Susan Swick start because she's a psychiatrist. And you might want to take some notes on this for yourself, for your kids, and your mother would appreciate it. Define grit and resilience and why it's important to people clinically, so that we can understand why we can translate that really into the workplace, into what that means in terms of leadership and for International Women's Day, making it happen. You have to have grit and resilience to make it happen, right?
Well, and I actually think everyone needs resilience especially, but grit also. And I'll give the little warning at first, Carol, to throw the book around me if I'm talking too much. Okay. Reach out. That is not why I got kicked out of Bible camp. I asked too many questions. So
Who is God and why isn't she here?
It was good.
I was skeptical.
So I'm an adult and a child psychiatrist, and what I've done for the last 13 years or so, 12 years, is work in a program first at Mass General Cancer Center, and then I started it at Newton Wellesley about 5 years ago, which was a cancer center program for cancer center patients that still had kids at home, so patients that were still raising dependent children. And the program was called PACT, Parenting in a Challenging Time. For anyone who's a parent, that's all the time unless they're sleeping. But this was the specific challenge of a serious or life-threatening illness in a parent. And what I would do is meet with parents, and we would really strategize in very practical ways about how they were going to support resilience in their kids and in their whole family in the setting of the serious illness. And that's what resilience is, right? Resilience is a capacity to adapt in the setting of adversity. And in mental health, this has been a popular topic. Right now, it's actually, I think, a very hot topic in education, in business, in politics, but it's been a hot topic in psychiatry for about 60 years. And there's been a lot of research done on it, and actually in child psychiatry is where the interest really started. And so I can tell you some about what we've learned in the last 60 years contributes to resilience, and then talk about grit a little bit too.
Okay.
But I think it's very relevant.
2 to 3 minutes?
Got it. So resilience. Okay, so then the quick sinker is that the critical ingredients, so I'm going to tell you 2 critical ingredients in resilience. If you look at lists that shrinks have developed, they all have at least a dozen ingredients in them, because that's how psychologists and psychiatrists are. They're like 12, 15, 20 items long. But the 2 things that keep coming up in studies of children and adults as being the critical ingredients, the first is something called an internal locus of control. Has anyone heard of this? Essentially, it is the belief that the events that happen in one's life are a function of one's own actions. It's not a deluded psychotic belief that you control the weather. Instead, it's a real frame, it's a focus on what one can control and the choices one has made and how those have translated into where you're at. And then in new situations with new challenges, it's a focus on what one can do. So if I were a person with an external locus of control, and I had just given this very short, too long presentation at a panel discussion, and it did not go well at all because it was way too long. I never got to the central part of my discussion. Afterwards, I would say to myself, well, Carol never told me how long I had to talk, and I didn't know who was going to be in the audience, and I thought I was going to have a mic, and I thought I could bring my PowerPoint, but no one told me. So you'd see I was kind of putting blame elsewhere, and I was powerless to make any different choices. If, on the other hand, I had an internal locus of control, I would have said, that didn't go quite the way I wanted it to go. Maybe next time I should learn a little bit more about what's expected. I should review the questions that were going to be asked. I should go back and review what I know about resilience. I should see if I can really get it down to 2 or 3 minutes and then practice it so that I don't get nervous. So that's the internal locus of control. The second thing that comes up the most often whenever we look at what contributes to resilience is a capacity for meaning making meaning. And essentially, this is very simple. It's an ability to know oneself very well, have a clear sense of who you are, what your goals, your ambitions are, and sort of the narrative, the story of your life, so that whenever you face setbacks, you can put those setbacks into perspective, in sort of the greater story of your life, so that you can manage it. You can figure out how you're going to change course. It doesn't mean, again, that you imagine you have magical powers to change it, but you're able to sort of integrate it into your life in a way that makes it meaning. You want to move on?
So I mean, we come back to it, but those are the 2 key elements of resiliency. And there is a test that we've written down for you that you can take online to see what your resiliency is and your grit score.
The test is for grit, and grit is a little bit more specific, and it's more about basically about meaning making. Grit is a construct that's more recent. They developed it when they were studying what made for success in students, and they discovered it actually wasn't intelligence, it wasn't how rich your parents are, it wasn't how long people read to you. It was this mix of passion and perseverance, and it was a strong sense of who one was. Even in little kids, they didn't have a ridiculously strong sense, but they had a sense of who they were, what their strengths and weaknesses were, and they had an ambition that was well defined.
So
And it was
that fits with
organizing.
a lot of what we do in leadership here, so we'll come back to that.
And there's a great TED Talk on grit.
Yep.
It's about 10 minutes long,
Yep,
so.
we can give you a link.
It
Angela's
is
done.
excellent.
It's great.
And so Deb, really, I'm sorry, Deb, in terms of these concepts of grit and resiliency, you work with kids all day long, many of whom come from environments where they need that, and they succeed against all odds. So how does grit and resiliency translate into success as you see it for people who are coming out?
Yeah, I do think it plays out differently for those who come from stable environments and stability in terms of emotional stability and economic stability. And so for those girls that we serve through a big sister, so just a little background on what we do. So Big Sister brings in volunteers like Amy to be matched with a young girl between the ages of 7 and 15 and ask them to stay in that girl's life for at least a year to provide support and encouragement and guidance. So most of the girls, the majority of the girls do live in the neighborhoods of Boston. And they, as I said, come from families that are not emotionally necessarily or economically stable. So what we do through a Big Sister is help provide that sort of that grit, that perseverance to stay the course. So before you can do that and have that belief that that's possible, for some of these girls, they have to understand that there are goals out there. And how do I, create the steps, the pathways, not, first of all, to have a goal, and second of all, how do I get there? So a Big Sister is exposing those girls to different activities, to experiences that they wouldn't ordinarily have, whether it's going to a museum or hearing music, or even, going to the, public garden and going skating. It's also watching the Big Sister and how she lives her life and seeing that there are other ways to live. So it is establishing first and foremost that yes, helping that girl have a vision for her future, right? And then also helping her with that pathway. So a lot of people think, grit, it's stamina, it's really believing, as you said, that's where it ties into the resilience, that you have something inside to get you to where you want to go. And how does that happen? It's some adult in your life that believes that you are capable of reaching a higher purpose, of having a vision and actually seeing it to fruition. So, that's in a nutshell.
And Meredith, this is a work environment, and we're talking about making it happen. What we're trying to do here is get sort of the clinical reality, people growing up reality. What about people in the real world, in leadership positions? How does being an entrepreneur, being a CEO, and why is grit and resilience that you've developed throughout your life important? How should people bring that to work?
Well, I think being an entrepreneur is the epitome of grit because you are passionate about what you're doing. You are continually, regardless of your sex, surrounded around people who are saying no, it can't be done, or no, I'm not going to fund you. The average venture-backed entrepreneur has been turned down, I think I saw a stat, like 60 times. Women, it's probably exponentially. I've never seen it applied to a woman, but I represent part of the 2.7% of venture-backed CEO tech companies. So I'm in rarefied air, and primarily because my investor saw my activity in 2 previous companies that he was a minority investor in, and believes in, has no gender bias, doesn't belong to a big VC firm that's also predominantly male. And that's a big part of the problem in the venture capital world, that there are actually less women venture capitalists over the last 9 years than more. So, I think that anybody in the entrepreneurial space is all about grit. And I'm not quite sure how I got here. I guess I was raised by parents and grandparents that told me about their kind of gritty experiences of kind of rising up through the ranks. I saw my sister do really well at an early stage company called the Entertainment Sports Programming Network, or ESPN. I think now she was a sports fanatic. I play sports. She could quote every statistic in the world. So, saw her become a very successful executive at ESPN, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to get in on the ground floor of things. And somehow I've never gotten out of that. I was in the breakthrough technologies. So, you know, it's surrounded by a lot of people. When you're surrounded by a lot of people with passion, it's very exciting. And, you know, I see a lot of people at Slalom being very passionate about helping their clients. And so I think there's a lot of grit here in this room right now. You don't have to be an entrepreneur to have grit.
Does anyone in the room have an example of a situation where grit and resiliency is either being supported in slalom or not being supported? Or have seen it really in their own life and kind of hearing some of these things and have a story that you'd like to share with us?
Not to put them on the spot. We got a couple of days at least.
That's all right. Okay, well, just remember, you might get more questions.
And Carol, as you go, I had to turn the air on, because it's going to get too warm, so I can ask you guys.
How's
Speak
that?
up.
Okay.
Can you hear in the back?
Just for
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But and again, I think we want to set the table, and people can eat at it later, which is, if you really want to get into some detail about grit and resiliency, Susan, in particular, is someone to really talk to about that. She has a tremendous background in this arena, lectures on it, and has, written about it and researching it. And I think it's, as someone who works with leadership development and training and development, I can tell you that if you're not resilient, you can't handle a reality, and you don't know what your impact is in the situation, you're never going to get better. So I think this is actually seminal. And I do think, having observed a lot of senior women over the years, the ones in my age group who got to where they got to, a lot of it was about grit and about resiliency. I took the test. There's a possibility of 5. I got a 4.98.
So Carol, I would say too, the thing to remember is that building resilience starts in earliest childhood, but is never too late. And that there's always things that people can do if they're sort of reflecting on how resilient they are or on their grittiness, that they can do to cultivate more resilience and more grit. It's not rocket science to do it. And the quick version of it is trying to take advantage of any time there's a small adverse event that you're facing, a small challenge. Every challenge is an opportunity to practice instead of feeling defeated and overwhelmed by it, which is natural with challenges, big ones and small ones. But the small ones are the best ones. To say this is a chance for me to practice like my internal locus of control, my ability to put it in perspective and make meaning of it in the story of my life, and the kind of person I am and how I manage challenges. And taking failure as something else as an opportunity.
One of the things I heard, I don't know if you can relate to it, to have an open mindset so that you are improving versus
Right.
having to prove yourself.
So there's a lot of really interesting research. I won't talk about research because it's a little dry, but Carol Dweck is a psychologist at Stanford who's done a lot of research basically about how, essentially it's about cultivating resilience. And she studies 7th graders a lot. She studied a group of 7th graders in a gifted and talented program. And she put them into 2 separate groups. And one group was told that they were praised for the grades they got. And the other group was praised for their effort, for how hard they were working. And then they increased the level of difficulty in the assignment they were giving these kids. And the kids who had been praised for the grades they got, as soon as they came up against the thing that was a little too hard for them, they gave up, they stopped. And the kids who had been praised for effort, as soon as they came up against the thing that was a little too hard for them and they failed, they got energized by the failure, and they showed how much effort they could put into something, and they redoubled their efforts. And
That's what we want at Slalom.
right.
So just to comment as you guys are talking, I mean, there's a group of Slalom folks here. You guys all did already gritty process, right? And is it easy to get in here? How many interviews on average do you think you guys go through? Like what, 5, 7? Talk about a test of grit, right? One of the things we actually evaluate as we're going through there, since you guys are in already. But a lot of people take to that, right? And one of the things we don't take well is like, it's the 4th time you've asked me to come in, we've been across there, right? It shows a character trait of, okay, who am I playing, right, as you were telling Susan. So I think, I would say everyone in here has a tremendous amount of grit to get here. How do we leverage it? And if we didn't have an example, I'm going to call somebody out. I know this person's going to hate me for it, but I mean, Amy, I go back to the story I told earlier, right? I mean, can you share, right, the first time you came to me and talked about I want to do a Big Sisters event, where we've gone to?
Yeah, so for people that aren't familiar, this Saturday we're holding an event here at Slalom for a bunch of big and little sister matches to just kind of go around the office and do some different activities that highlight different skills that we as consultants feel are valuable for both consultants, but also growing up, like communication, teamwork. And I think I presented the idea last March, maybe, and we were supposed to do the event in November, and yeah, I just came with the idea, didn't have a lot of background on it to start with, and just kind of kept building on it, and every time I had a meeting with the girls that helped me volunteer, I'm like, I know we've talked about this 100 times, but it's gonna happen.
It's gonna be 101.
It's finally happening this Saturday. It's very exciting.
Yeah, very good.
And it started with an event of, it was one match, right? It was Amy having a passion about something, and we're gonna bring one person. My challenge to her was make it broader to the office, and we've now got, I think, 17 matches going here. We've involved 13 or 15 women from our office in there. So it wasn't easy, definitely part of that, and I look at, to me, that was great, because we would easy to be like, well, I'm just gonna go do this somewhere else, and I'll continue to be engaged with Big Sisters in a different capacity. But she wanted to bring it here to Slalom, the passion to go ahead, and I challenge her to go bring it to our Slalom Connect group, see what we can do, and congratulations.
And Terry. So we're gonna go on that one. We're gonna move it to an even more direct business concept, which is that of branding. Now, we're doing a lot of strategic work at Slalom. We just rebranded, so everybody ought to be like right up at this topic of branding. So, Meredith, we're gonna start with the business this time and go more to the personal. What is the role of a corporate brand? We're gonna talk a little bit about that, and a personal brand, and how are they related? Because, I think that would be interesting for people to see, very brief but focused on that. And then, have you seen any differences between the personal brands that men and women executives tend to follow?
Okay. So I'm going to ask men in the room, how many of you have ever been called aggressive? All right. And how many of the women in the room have been called aggressive? So one of the biggest challenges that the workforce has.
Oh, wait, there's another side to that. Was it a positive comment?
So being aggressive, being successful means likability. When men are successful and aggressive, men and women like them. But it's a negative for women, right? And so that is a mentality that until you talk about it and acknowledge it, it's never gonna change. And it goes to the core of how women are perceived, and also how we advocate for ourselves, right? I mean, there's kind of an interesting point that I think, I went to the Sheryl Sandberg breakfast. She was in town a couple of, 2 years ago, maybe, for the Lean In, and it was probably half men, half women. I took one guy from my office, and I think he was more affected by it. In fact, I wished I'd taken more men to that breakfast, because men don't realize, although listening to Russell, I think Slalom is actually on a higher level here, but that women are just naturally self-effacing. They will naturally, when asked why they're successful, it'll be team. Oh, it's really my whole team. Or, oh, it's a lot of luck. And when a man is asked why they're successful, it's because they are damn good. So it's this very interesting perception that needs to get called out and recognized. I applaud John Chambers from Cisco. He actually made his entire management team read the Lean In and report back to him on 3 things that they were going to change. Because it is, how do you recognize women? How do you call out your employees? You might have amazing employees lurking, but they're not necessarily self-advocators, so you have to go that extra mile. And Cheryl talks about how she was asking people and said, I'm not going to take any more questions. All the women put their hands down because they listened. And the men still had their hands up, and she still answered the questions, and she was oblivious. I have my own little story of that. When I was at Roadrunner, I was on the executive management team. I had an amazing administrative assistant. There was a job opening, an entry-level position in the department. And another administrative assistant signed up to be considered. And I hadn't even thought of asking my administrative assistant to be considered, because it wasn't, right? It wasn't part of my change mentality, even though I'm all about empowering women and go, but sometimes when something's right in front of you, you don't see that. So I actually went to my administrative assistant. I said, you really should go for this job. And she was like, I'm not sure if I'm ready, which is such a common refrain for women, and it doesn't exist in the vocabulary of men. So she's a senior VP at Comcast right now. I mean, she's a completely successful executive. But if I hadn't pushed her, she wouldn't have gone there. And so I think that's a challenge to all the men and women, because this applies to everybody, to look at who you have in your workforce. Realize that the self-effacing, oh, it's not me, you know, they are amazing people that maybe you just need to push them a little bit more than you would to the man on your team.
But and the branding implications, right, for someone is who am I as a person, who am I as a leader, what am I trying to accomplish as an individual, what is the brand I want to be known by, how do I want to be known? And of course, the corporation or the entity's brand is how do I want to treat people, how do I want to be known, what is the trust that I'm trying to build with my employees or the people who work with me. So thinking about these brands very carefully, which I think Slalom does do from a cultural standpoint, is really, really critical for people to both get better at what they do and then to empower others. Because it's not just about you getting better. It's also actually about how you bring people along with you, which is part of the story that we're here to see. So Deb, Big Sister has a brand.
You do?
And do you believe that you help girls and families work to develop their own brands as they're going through the program?
Well, when I first started out, it was really clear. We asked anybody who was part of Big Sister, you know, why do you want to work at Big Sister? What's Big Sister about? And everybody had this idea. It's, of course, you know, helping girls build their confidence to succeed. And so everybody had this other thought. Like even when I was interviewed, they asked me over and over again, how are you going to differentiate Big Sister? What is it about Big Sister? It's kind of easy, right? Because you want girls to build their confidence to succeed. But what I found is that there was a disconnect. And the disconnect was that at the time, and now we have 2 men, but we had all women working at Big Sister. But those women who would say they want girls to have their voice, they want girls to take risks, they want girls, you know, to try out new things. Here we had an organization where people wouldn't, that didn't push the envelope. Women who never, when there was a position for manager, I never got anyone internally saying, I want that job, right? There were people that would avoid conflict, but I don't want girls to avoid conflict. So what I really had to shift for the brand to really be a solid brand was to shift the culture within the organization, which was, as I said, predominantly all women. So it was getting women to stand up in front of the group instead of staying in their seat and answering a question or making a presentation. It was women encouraging them to go for jobs that they didn't think they were ready for, that it was too much of a stretch. So it was really a lot internally. Then that ripples out to how they're training Big Sisters. So the Big Sister training had to change. The support of Big Sisters had to change. And about the people that we bring on our board. So it wasn't enough that people were there saying, oh yeah, I'm in this because it's a good thing to be in this. It's, you know, it was more like when I first started, somewhat grassroots, but not really on advocating, not on changing themselves. Because I do believe if you don't change within first, if you're going to be a part of this organization, that we're not going to make the change. And the brand will be hollow. Yeah, it started out as a brand about mentoring, one-to-one mentoring. It was part of the Big Brother, Big Sister organization, the only one that served girls. But then it was not really values-driven. It wasn't from within. So that's how it changed. It changed from within. And now we've been able to grow our revenue, grow the number of girls served, quality indicators are up. It's all because it started with the values of the brand. Really, what are we talking about brand? We're talking about the culture and the way that we behave. And that ripples out in every aspect of what we do.
And anyone at Slalom who's working on the business model canvas or any of the strategy work can hear the alignment, right, between the value proposition, the branding, what you have to do that, the resources you need to deliver, the partners you need to have, what you need to live internally, the culture, and all the things that we're trying to think about. So this is not just hollow stuff, it's really the way that organizations actually change. And Susan, and now taking it more to the academic side, because I think this one has a really link not just for people doing their work and doing their job, but being people, right? You know, when you think about this, how can people kind of relay these concepts of their personal and corporate brand into a better context for themselves individually? And have you seen that play out in the clinical stage?
Well, I think that when you said one of these things is not like the other, I thought you were talking about me. Because I had a little different training. But the concept of brand, I think, is a really interesting concept, and I actually think it's a central concept in sort of mental health. And I don't mean the opposite of illness, I mean sort of wellness, the mental fitness. And both when you're thinking about resilience and other sort of constructs about mental well-being, it always starts with authentic self-awareness, like a really rich, solid knowledge of oneself, of your strengths, of your weaknesses, sort of emotional fluency, being able to like recognize, manage, identify, and even utilize your emotions and those in other people. And that it seems to me that brand, the ideal brand, is about this sort of, it has to be this authentic, it's not about marketing, it's about this authenticity. And you have to show it, it's not about telling. And if what you're telling is actually not authentic, it's not going to succeed, it's going to fail. And at a personal level, if what you're telling is not actually true to who you are, it's going to lead to sort of anxiety, depression, general distress, and probably not a whole lot of success in the professional or personal realm. So I like to think about the idea of, I mean, this came up in a conversation with Carol and I once when I was talking about how when I work as I wear my other hat, when I'm just doing child psychiatry, and I'm talking to parents about their child who's struggling with, let's say, an anxiety disorder, and trying to help them strategize around how to help their child manage their own distress. And often I'll be talking to parents who are very successful at work, and yet when they're at home and they're trying to figure out how to help their child manage distress, they're really at odds and ends. They don't have any framework for thinking about this. And we were talking about the idea that if parents could step back and conceptualize who their family is, who they as parents have decided their family is going to be, what's their family brand going to be, that, as long as it is born of a real authentic sense of their values, their organizing principles, their strengths, it's going to create, not only is it going, it's not about marketing or communicating a brand to other people, it's about explicit awareness. When you've given language to something, it's very organizing. And as parents, it's especially powerful because, you know, where the rubber hits the road is like when you're in the grocery store dealing with a tantrum and you're trying to figure out what to do. If you have your two strategies, you know, one is you scream at your child and someone calls social services, and the other is you just like give them the candy bar they want. It's helpful to be able to kind of default, to check in. You're like checking in with your mission statement. You're checking in with the brand. I'm like, is this going to kind of serve who we really are? It helps you sort of get back up to maybe 10,000 feet from being down on the ground, and make a decision that's going to dovetail with the values and principles that sort of organize and drive the whole family. So I think knowing yourself, the personal branding, and then thinking about how that translates is really relevant too.
Right, and it's not just family and parenting, but also each person here in terms of leadership, in terms of your own work, how you come to work. And I think one of the gifts that you have as Slalom is being able to bring yourself to work. I've never worked in an environment where that was considered a good thing. And so, I've worked in a lot of environments, most not good. And I think that this concept of really knowing yourself and your brand and how you want to develop what the organization's brand and how those all fit together are very important when we talk about making it happen for what matters and kind of what can change the world, back to my original comment, right? The girl effect. That's to me what International Women's Day is about. Like, what are the things that we can do to make it happen, to really change the world? And some of these things are using our grit resiliency in a positive way, developing a brand, working with us as a brand that we're consistent with, and making sure that we're these things are. Does anyone have any comments or any observations?
Yeah, I actually have two questions, if that's okay. They relate to both grit and brand, and it's for everyone on the panel. So with regard to both coaching, what you've seen either in the workplace, on the job, etc., when it comes to male and female, being one, who you are, two, nurturing grit, and three, getting to that point of not just being self-confident, but being an advocate, being someone who will go and ask for things that perhaps a male, stereotypically a male will, right? Or being more
Give me the ball.
salesy in that way.
Give me the ball, coach. I
Yeah,
wanna go on.
kind of way. Where have you seen a disconnect between celebrating the individual person and what they bring to the table and being quote unquote themselves and confident in themselves and pushing beyond that to be someone else that they may not be comfortable being?
That's a that could be a therapy session.
Yeah.
I'll just say that for a lot of the women that I work with, they don't see themselves, like, I'm not good at, I've heard that over and over, I'm not good at public speaking, I'm not good at, so I will coach to try it, I want you to try it, because, and then I can align it really easily though with the girls, like, do you want that for the little sisters? Yes. Okay, so we're gonna start with you, so I'm gonna help you to do that, so it is, I do get that pushback though, I'm not good at it, and I'm not interested in it, and I'll say, well, what do you want this, what would you say to a little sister who said that, you know, so try to push people beyond what they think that they're capable of, because a lot of it is their own messaging, what they've heard.
I would say it's important to call out that behavior if you're seeing it. So if you're seeing someone being self-effacing when they shouldn't be,
Right.
you know, I was judging Mass Challenge last year, and this very talented young woman from MIT was talking about her team, and she pulled up her slide, just started reading her team, and she goes, and I'm probably the least qualified person here. And I could see all the judges looking like, what? You know, and then afterward, I particularly called it out. I'm like, she did the epitome of what females do. That was very self-effacing. She's super smart. And they were like, yeah, that was really weird. And it was a negative impact that she had made on them. And so it's important to just call it out and show it as an example of that doesn't mean anything. You know, just because it's something that you're interpreting differently, it's not true. You know, I've also seen very aggressive women, you know, get kind of the dirty looks and, you know, and I think it's important to just, you know, again, well, you know, she's in a tough position and just try to work through it, you know.
And Susan, can we bring, I'm going to bring yours, because the next question, I want you to think about it, because you can answer the next question and bring this into it, I think, as a summation. 'Cause I think I know you can do this. You're an MD, PhD, whatever you are. Give me more degrees. But because the next thing that we wanted to talk about was leadership, governance, and political power. And does it matter if we have diverse workforces in these arenas? And I just want to give some statistics, because I think they really underline what Anna's focusing on, right? Some of them are on your book there, but in 2012, one of the 5 best paid executives, of the 5 best paid executives of the S&P 500 index, 198 were women, so 8% of the total. Those high achievers earned on average $5.3 million, so a pretty good group. But it's 18% less than the men were earning in that data set. Businesses with women on their boards outperform companies with all male boards by 26%. I sit on 3 corporate boards, and only one of them has more than one female on it. And I can tell you why that is. It's just so obvious to anyone who sits on one who's not a man. And in the top 10 technology companies, those with a female CEO have 21% more women in leadership roles than those led by a male CEO, which is something that Russell and I have talked a lot about with Slalom. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. As you get more women at the top, more women feel comfortable and see they can get to the top, so more people come in the pipeline and move up to get to the top, and it's the self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think that this concept of having women in positions of political power, in positions of board of governance, and in positions of leadership is actually, when you look at the statistics, extremely important, right? And this comes back to Anna's question. So, you know, Susan, I just want to come back. Can you make some linkages between this concept of having people at the top who are empowering others to make change and getting people through at the front end to put themselves in a position where they feel comfortable doing that? And that's not just true of women by mistake. I would say that's true of lots of minorities. That's true of lots of men. I'm not making, this is just, in this case, we're talking specifically about international women's day.
No, I was thinking, yeah, I can do it really easily.
See?
Thursday. That was like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. You know, when I was thinking about International Women's Day and making it happen, I was thinking that in a way, the goal is if you are, let's say as a manager, so I'm the chief of a little tiny division of child psychiatry, but I manage a small team, or as a parent, or you know, in the office, of course. You are thinking about trying to help people cultivate their actual strengths, and be aware of them and their actual ambitions and interests. And I think sometimes you get in trouble when what people think are their strengths, they're missing. So I have someone on my team who uses humor a lot and thinks that humor is, it's a man in this case, a great strength of his, but he actually, I think, leans on it when he's feeling insecure or defensive. ashamed of something, and managing that is a different kind of challenge. If though, in this setting, you are able to help, maybe let's call them vulnerable populations, although I don't think of as women as being especially vulnerable, but populations that have been underrepresented somewhere. If you're able to help them cultivate their their strengths, their authentic selves, so that they can realize their full potential in a way that they're working and they're satisfied and they find it meaningful, then businesses will thrive. So not every woman should be on a board, but maybe every board should have some women on it. And likewise, if the women in an organization or in your family are realizing their strengths, then probably the men are too. Like it's a good proxy for the fact that you're doing a good job of actually having it be somewhat individualized, and genuinely focusing on helping people cultivate their strengths, cultivate sort of awareness and fluency about who they are and what they bring to the table, learning how to mitigate their vulnerabilities or weaknesses so that they are building a career or a life that feels meaningful, not just measured by money, although money is a nice proxy again, but is actually genuinely satisfying and meaningful. And it seems to me that when people are doing that, everybody wins. Like work goes well, and that's a measure of health in my office.
So Meredith, if you could take that and very quickly, just 2 quick points. One, should men care about women on boards or senior positions or political power, and why? Should men care about women on boards or in senior leadership positions or political power, and why?
So,
What Susan's saying, and what Anna's asking.
there's more money. Show me the money, and when you have a woman on a board, the company is more profitable. So Credit Suisse had a survey and a study that they came out with that was actually across Europe and the U.S. And if a woman is in 5% or greater top operational jobs, so it doesn't have to be the CEO, they have a 27% higher return on equity and a 42% higher return on dividends. So it's better for the business to have women on board.
Why do you think that is?
Well, women represent 50% of the population.
And don't you think also that the kind of women that are getting up against those statistical odds probably are bringing a lot of strengths to the table?
Exactly, and a perspective that, sorry, that was asked of.
No, you're not.
Okay.
It's diversity of thought.
I think it's partially diversity of thought.
It's also the consumer.
Right.
The people with purchasing power are women, or they may not have the money necessarily, but they're making decisions to buy. And so if boards are being informed by the people who actually make the buying decisions, and to make better decisions.
It also helps, I think, when there's balance. Like good decision-making often requires that there's some tension between different perspectives, and I don't think you get that necessarily just by having diversity of gender and race and religion, but by having diversity of sort of posture and what people's styles and values are. I think that can bring a much more rich sort of strategic.
But yet, in the face of it seeming very obvious to all of us,
Yeah.
women board composition hasn't changed in the last decade.
Right.
So 10 years, it hasn't changed at all. It stayed at 12%, 12.1 to 12.3, something like that.
Carol, in your intro to that question, you said it's obvious. Why? Why?
I mean, to me, it's just because I have 3 sons and 4 brothers, so in full disclosure, right?
They're just better.
I think that girls are raised, and women who are very successful are raised to think differently. You're raised to say no at an early age. Gang rape is not a female problem in terms of creating it. Groupthink is generally not a female problem. That groupthink, fraternizing, doing things together, having a team is a very male concept. And I think having someone who just says, not really, can we try something different, is actually a huge positive. And I see it all the time. It's like everyone's saying, that's what we should do. Why? Well, because we've always done it that way, or it's not, there's not this, in getting someone who just thinks really different and having them ask a lot of questions and getting them explained, I found this really changed the thinking. That's just my own.
And so the way that at Big Sister we had mostly women on the board, I do
Good,
think
yeah.
that this, do think that it's men and women together. And so we've increased the number of men on the board as we've we've increased the number of men who work at Big Sister. And so I would have to say that we are looking for more men on our board, if anybody is interested in being a part of this dialogue and making change for the next generation of girls growing up in the city.
Yeah, just as a point of reference, in case people are more interested in knowing more about this topic, The Economist also did a 6 to 10 page article in the last 2 years specifically on women on boards, and it was the front page of The Economist because it's such a hot topic.
And the great thing about just, again, talking about it, making it public, I was approached last year by a young startup, a bunch of 20-something guys. I think they have 10 people in the company, not a single woman, but they read the stats and they actively wanted a woman as a board member. So just seeing that is, part of the change that's happening.
Let's do it. One more thing, and then we're gonna open it up. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to ask a question about like being a woman, maybe not necessarily on a board, but being in a company that's predominantly men, and how to like voice your opinions to the point that where they're like kind of accepted, or like you can negotiate so much, but how much sometimes I often feel silent.
Okay, so how many women in this room have said something during a meeting and 5 to 10 minutes later, one of the guys says the exact same thing? And everyone turns to him and says, that's a really good idea. How many men think they've ever done it? The answer is loudly, carefully, and generally what I try to do now is before a meeting, reach out to several other women or men who are really good guys who might be there, tell them your points in advance, and make sure they say, as Susie said, or I'd like to expound on whatever. Very effective. Very effective. And if you start with the boss or the number 2 or 3 guy, and he repeats it, you're in really good shape. Has anyone got a better idea?
It's part of the challenge that, we can talk about inclusion and diversity on the things that are far more like visible and tangible. But what I find in my own experience is style. And one of you alluded to the topic of style, and I was like, that's my ding thing in the back of my head.
You have a different style.
Yeah.
You don't fit.
Yeah.
It's like on the board, you don't fit. You're just different.
Yeah. And that's harder to, be inclusive of because it's, you can't like see it and touch it. I mean, you can recognize it after the fact, but.
I would say the advice is know your audience. I mean, like any good salesperson, know your audience and build a coalition when you want something accomplished, realizing that, maybe if 3 people say it, or like Carol was saying, right? I mean, it's all about strategy, right? Unfortunately, a little bit more strategy than what you think you might have to do.
So we're going to talk, we'll come back to all these points, and afterwards there'll be lots of time for questions. But I want to touch on the final point before we break it up, which is the pipeline. So this, to me, is the most interesting question of all, right? So women represent 51% of the PhDs in this country, and worldwide it's higher. 51% of business school applicants, 67% of college graduates, and more than 70% of the 2012 valedictorians in the U.S. National Center for Statistics. 85% of board seats are held by men. I love this one, that 50% of board seats are held by women, which is fewer than the number of directors named John, Robert, William, and James. And, you can go on and on and on. So what happens between cup and mouth? I mean, why is it that you're getting this incredible growth of educated, talented women at the front end? And by the way, in business, more than 50% of the new hires. But when you get to my level, or many other people's level in this room, the numbers are stunningly stark, right? So if you look at the statistics, it's not because they're all having kids, and it's not because of work-life balance. It just isn't. It's 25%. I would bet it's probably close to that for men. So what is it that really happens? And I just think before we close up and ask you questions, what were these ladies doing in their 30s and early 40s? Because that's the really crucial age. The dropout rate just absolutely escalates in the late 30s and into the early 40s. And what is it that, that these people were doing, and what advice or what things would they see that, that they look back on that they would do differently, or they would tell somebody in their 30s or 40s now to think about it?
In my 30s, I was having children. A lot of children. It's like a big haze. But actually in medicine, it's so funny because it's a bit regimented. The pipeline is actually really built in medicine that you go through up until the point that you come out of all of your advanced training, which for me was around 34, 35. And I sort of treaded water for a while because I was having children and I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. And it wasn't until I was in my 40s that I sort of took the bull by the horns a little bit and decided where I was, and I realized that I had been treading water. Decided I felt like I was kind of withering on the vine a little bit, not in the fertile sense, but just the vine was cut, the vine was down. But professionally, I was like, this is actually not where I exactly want to be. And it took me having to really consciously shift what I was doing, push to have more of what I wanted. I'm very interested in her question about like when I don't think this is necessary, it is more common with women, but maybe not unique to women, that when you are in a room and your voice isn't being heard, for whatever reason, how do you respond to it in a way that enables you to stay in that room and be heard and be welcomed still, and you still want to stay in that room? I think that's actually really challenging. And often when you're not being heard, if you have something valid, interesting, constructive to say, they need to hear you. But it's very hard to find a way to sort of bring this statistical sheet in and say, you idiots, you're not listening to me, you need to listen to me, and have the room still want you to be there. And instead, to kind of complicate people's thinking so their ears open in a way that actually makes everybody feel the wiser. Does that make any sense?
And what would you, sort of as a summary comment, what would you look back on that period? You stayed in the workforce, and I think the thing that Susan has to offer to all of us, because she offered it to me, and it was way too late for me, but I wish I'd known it.
It's never too late.
Working, having both your parents work, but especially your mother, is actually good for children. And
There's data. There's data.
although I this is a really critical fact for both the men and the women in the audience, even if you're not having children.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is specific to parenting, I think. But when you're struggling to fit everything into a day and you're raising children, a piece of things is this really worth it to me? Is this meaningful enough to me? When you have kids, they some days, it is a mix of fabulous, joyful, boring, and infuriating, and yet it always feels meaningful. And when work is not feeling as meaningful, unless it's paying you a mint, and even then, it may not feel like enough. And finding a way to make work meaningful, and then bearing in mind that there is good data that suggests that for kids, having both parents work is actually valuable as long as they do have some quality time with their parents in which they feel genuinely known and recognized. So basically, if you as a parent are communicating to your children what you treasure about them, you're doing your job. Everything else is frosting. And probably to some degree that's true of leadership. That if you as a leader are communicating to the people that you're managing, that you're developing, what you think their gifts are.
Or your clients.
Or your clients. Of course, yes, my language is clunky with business knowledge. That businessy stuff. Then you're like 90% of the way there. Then you know them, they know you, they're listening, and then it's also easier probably for you to complicate their thinking when you need to. If you're like, but you're doing this wrong, or you're going to get in trouble here, or I think you're going to have to work really hard to bring this grade up if you're talking to your child.
Deb, I'm sorry, Meredith, what were you doing in career?
So I was having my 2 children as well in my late 30s. And it's interesting though, because very common, you kind of downshift a little bit, right? I was traveling like crazy, but I was passionate about really innovating in broadband technology at the time. And so I was working with a lot of startups and decided to kind of jump into the startup world. But at the same time, I jumped into a COO position that wasn't going to travel that much because I didn't want to travel because I was, gearing up to have kids. And then lo and behold, I had my daughter, and I think she was like 6 weeks old, and the board called me and had gotten rid of the CEO and wanted to know if I'd be the CEO. So, my exponential job, passion and challenge, got even higher. But it was fine. We just worked through it. But it's a blur, and it's part of don't go on that slow lane, which I guess never really occurred to me. I wasn't going on a slow lane per se because I was going into something that I loved, but I was very clearly thinking about the travel thing. And we worked through it. My husband and I worked through it, and it's tough though, but it's totally worth it. In your 30s, I would say just keep on focusing and don't think you have to go on the slow lane because, frankly, the workplace is even more open to flexibility than when I was 30 something.
And don't you think the slow lane doesn't have to be just about hours? It doesn't just have to be.
Oh, don't get Russell started.
Oh, yeah.
Hours matter, but more is not more in that case.
In my 30s, I was wearing bow ties and trying to fit into a male-dominated financial service organization. And because of my grit and resilience, I was successful, but it also led me out of that environment after being the VP of operations and having 300 people report to me and feel like I did make it, that I ended up in nonprofits. But I do think the workplace has absolutely changed today. And even with Big Sister, which is difficult in a nonprofit organization where it's all about allocation of resources and trying to have a balanced budget, and you can't. But we've been able to have 3 senior members, one who's here today, with children, being able to be working mothers and working fathers. And it's all about creativity, flexibility, and having a work environment where it is encouraged that all people in different stages of their life can be successful and still work and manage a house or take care of aging parents. So I do think it is changing from when I was wearing those bow ties and wearing suits and trying to adapt to a male-dominated environment.
And I'm going to close this part and open it up to your questions and to say 2 things. One is because we're women, we're used to, we won't not insult any of us. If someone wants to get up and leave, you don't have to stay. But we will have some Q&A and hopefully be a really good exchange. I will say that at that era, I had 2 young children. My first husband was deceased, and I had probably a very good situation in that there was no guilt. There was, if you wanted to eat, I needed to work, right? If you wanted to live in the house, I needed to work. There was no one else to compete with on a career front. And so I had no choice but to work. And as I look back on it now, I think that in some ways that was a gift because it forced me to do the things that Susan's talking about. It forced me to think about some of the things that Deb has done. And as I look back now, and it's hard for some of you who are young like this, but I have 4 kids. I'm remarried. All of their college tuitions and educations were paid. Nobody has any debt. My husband and I are able to retire in our late 50s and early 60s because we both worked really hard for really long periods of time. I'm now able to be with my adult children and help them go see places and think if they can and travel with them and do things with them now that I couldn't do with them when they were 2 and 3 and 4. I never saw their first steps. I never saw them score the goals. I never saw what they did. But now I can, and in many ways, I am more involved in my kids' lives at this point in my career than I've ever been. And so, it's a long life, and there's no one right answer at any one time. And we want to put out there, being in your 30s and 40s for men, for women, it is really, really tough. Whether you have kids, whether you don't have kids, whether you're married, whether you're not married, no matter what's going on. But there's a lot of other years, and people get through it with husbands who stay home and wives who change jobs, and both of them working full time, and someone who never had children, and someone who had 4 of them. And it's all good. It's just a matter of your perspective, which I think is what Susan is really talking about. And so making it happen is really something a very individual choice for men, for women, but it is about being Russell, you want to call on people?
Someone back.
Oh, me? Okay. So Susan, you talked about like your mission statement as a parent, but what about your mission statement sort of as an individual? And when you join the workplace, you're sort of new, and it takes a little bit of while to adapt, but you really want to be authentic. So do you have any tips, I guess any of you, have any tips to stay authentic to yourself and sort of check in if you might say something, or if you might act a certain way, or if you might get feedback from colleagues where they think that you come off a certain way?
That's a great question. I think if you're asking that question, you're probably staying authentic. And I do. I think having a personal mission statement is fantastic. Like when I think about family brand, I actually think that the task as a parent is to actually raise kids who feel like they're capable of determining their own brand, right? And that sounds, I don't want that to sound so cheesy. Like the idea is that it doesn't have to be that it gives you the directions for exactly what to say or do in every situation, but that you feel like you know your central organizing values and your principles. That if you were going to go back 30 years later and look at it, you would be like, oh yeah, I lived true to who I want to be. It can be aspirational too. I think saying, I want to be a person who lives with integrity. I want to be a person who makes the world a better place but has a lot of fun while doing it. And I don't think there's a right or wrong. I mean, brand could be evil. You could come up with an evil brand. That's like, I wouldn't like that, but that's your choice. But it would have to feel authentic. I think that it's the kind of thing where I was reading in preparing for this, thinking about this concept of brand. I was reading this article in Forbes about personal branding, and he had said that most people resist the idea of personal branding because they think it's going to take a lot of time and be really exhausting to have to examine like everything you do and how you wear and what you do and how does it like support the brand. And when I read this, I was like, you know what? Actually, if you have a true brand, like brand should be just about your authentic self. It should actually feel the opposite of exhausting. It should feel like it's a bit energizing. It's clarifying. It's organizing. And that I think in some ways it can be as simple, staying true to it can be as simple as having a bit of ritual every day where you have time where you check in with yourself. It's very easy for the currents of a day, a busy day, whether it's just work or it's family or it's friends or it's a phone call from your mom, can draw you along in riptides. And suddenly you've said things or done things, you're like, I'm not so sure that was true to who I actually want to be. And to know that you need to have a little time built in to just reflect on your day, whether it's when you have coffee in the morning or when you go to the gym at night. And it's hard to build in time, but building in a little time to reflect on it. But I think if it's true, it will be easy. It'll be the opposite part.
Kathleen, I think you have a question.
Since we're here talking about women, but also incorporating, obviously the men improvement thing, but I think there's a question on the table of, what are the benefits to men of including women in the workforce more and thinking about them in these executive positions? You can look at that in many different ways, and I think it's a question on the table that hasn't generally been talked about very much, not just here, but in general.
Meredith or Debbie, have any comment?
Well, I think we talked about it a little bit, right? I mean, the whole diversity and just everybody always wants to think out of the box. And, in a consulting environment, particularly like Slalom, like you're thinking of new ideas and how to really be change agents. So if you don't have an environment that's filled with change, kind of like you were talking about, your environment wasn't, there's authenticity there, right? So
I think you can make a business case for it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Then consumers, you
Yeah,
want to get in there on,
exactly.
right?
Right.
So you want creativity in the workplace, you want new ideas and innovation, and we're talking about that women will bring a different perspective, perhaps.
I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of evidence that it's profitable,
There
like
is
that it's good
evidence.
business. Yeah, but it also sounds like it can actually, the process of it can be better too. That feeling like you're in a workplace where people are valued for their specific strengths and not just sort of towing the line is empowering to everybody. When anybody has something unpopular to say, it's nice to know it's an environment.
I'll be a devil's advocate for a second,
Yeah.
because if it's a predominantly male environment,
Yeah,
there is change going on.
Yeah.
So, I would say the environment might think about how to keep an element of, the male thing as opposed to all diversity, this might be too abrupt of a change.
So I've got a question related to awareness. We've talked a lot about awareness, and I think for many of us, it just becomes more a matter of how can we understand what's happening in the workforce. I came from my mom's a very strong person, brought us up to be very confident individuals. I feel like I'm doing the same thing with my kids, my daughter, back. And I love the fact sheet, but I mean, to what extent, I'm a technologist style person, but to what extent is technology starting to change and enable sort of our ability to become more aware of, I'm not saying that it's a problem, it is because of the way we talk about it, but it's more of a matter of let's just raise awareness, because to me there's no differentiation, male, female, but it's more a matter of how can we help to change it and really drive this change in behavior.
So I think I'm going to quote Sheryl Sandberg, because I thought this, we cannot change what we're not aware of, and once we are aware, we cannot help but change, right? I mean, it's just awareness, really, and pointing it out, right? I mean, it's just, that's the simple answer to it.
Do we think technology helps, or lies, analyze statistics? I mean, this is great, but to what extent is it sort of, okay, I've seen a million of these things.
He's a data and analytics
How-
guy.
Well, I mean,
social networking helping.
in technology, obviously, all the stats around women aren't going into technology, and the whole STEM initiative to try to correct that. My personal take on it is there's huge opportunity for women in technology who are not engineers or scientists. I'm a prime example of that. So I think part of it is to actually educate everyone about all the opportunity, kind of like you're talking about your Big Sister program, right? All the things, and show them, talk about technology, because I think everybody thinks you need to be a programmer, and you don't.
Well, it was more along the lines of, I think two people have kind of gone in this direction around the idea of, you want to walk out of here with a sense of, an action item. What do we do? And one of the things that, this isn't common about our conversation today, it's more of a comment of all of these conversations that I've had and been witness to. And it's around, I feel very mixed in the message of where, as women, we sort of, quote unquote, fail ourselves, not sticking up for ourselves, not saying some of the things we should. But then at the same time, when I hear statistics about how women on boards add to the profitability, that speaks to the fact that we shouldn't change at all. Because really the difference is what brings the value in the long run. And isn't it fantastic that the world has created this sort of potential yin and yang of execution and business forthright? So where do we as women sort of read between the lines and decide which is more important to enforce the fact that we are who we are, and that has its value, period, versus, we should be more like men?
I don't think we're saying to be more like men. We're saying to be authentic, to be able to be a woman, to be, when we say speak up, it's that other people aren't telling you. So you're being who you are, not what others want you to be. And I think that is the difference, because women are always told what they should look like, how they should talk, how they should act. Forget that. You've got to be authentic and be who you are, and be in an environment that allows that for you. So I think the question I heard was, if your peers are telling you, you shouldn't have said it this way or that way, is that you want to work for an environment that values what you bring, right? Your creativity, your strengths. And I don't think we're saying
Be like men.
Be like men. I said I had to do that when I was in my 30s. Gave that up, What I'm saying is that, but I don't think it has to be that way now.
Well,
No, but I don't know how to change that, because I don't think it's died. Like, for example, you were saying women in technology. I can't tell you how many times people tell me I'm too technical. I have never heard a man be told it was too technical. Ever.
Right.
Yeah, but that's-
Well, I think women are judged differently. I think you said that before when you said about the aggressive question. So, man, woman, same resume, they put in Harriet, Howard, and the guy gets selected. Or business school exams, the book is changed, the name is changed, and the grade is higher if it's a man. This is reality. I don't think that our panelists, and I don't think any of us who are senior women, would ever say, be a man, or try to act like a man, or adopt all the attitudes of a man. I think we do bring something very, very special. I do think, however, and to the point, I don't know what your name is, the workers' do think that young women in particular, especially one who looks as young as you are.
That's just because everybody here's young.
No, but okay, there you go. But I do think you are at a particular disadvantage that you have to recognize, because I think that whether you're a woman or a man, when you're young and you come across with a great idea, it can sometimes be an entitlement reaction from the older generation. So I do think that enlisting people to help support your idea, pre-selling before the meeting, I think these are all very good ideas. And you have to be aware of that because you're female and because you look like you're 12.
Which will be a compliment.
That's right. At my age, you'll love it.
If you don't mind, we'll get 2 minutes on that. Sandra, I think it's a great point, and I want to give a little bit of my experience of how we got here. It's absolutely about being who you are. Right? There's no doubt it's about being who you are in this environment, and I will tell you today, all know it, that is not okay across the board today. Right? That is a path in which we are pushing to get there. When I came on board, the reason Carol and I are here doing this today, so I called her up and I said, the plan was always to have more women leadership. How do we get that? Where do we go? And what I found is the women who represented the facts and things I believed in. When I had the opportunity to truly live this, not live in someone else's definition of what it meant to be inclusive, the women who represented that didn't represent what I thought we wanted to be. The women who were successful in that consulting world were not going to be successful in the market. Those people I wanted to go forward, so I don't care until I fail. She told me later that I was right. Here we are. But the fact was, when I look back, 2 points you made. One, the more, I knew what it looked like, and I knew what it felt like, and they weren't the same no matter what. When I came here, I had the opportunity to do that. But, as I've been made more aware, as people have now actually come to me and said, hey, by the way, when you did this, it didn't feel good, it didn't feel right. Things that even I thought I was doing right, it was like, whoa, that's not where I want to be. So, I'm appreciative of those people in this room and elsewhere who have brought that to my attention so we can make that change and bring it forward. And when I look back at some of the things, and the women who were successful in quotes, like, she can hang with the guys, that's embarrassing. And yet that's the culture that's out there that made those women successful. And that's not the culture that's going to take us forward to make us more successful. Senator, your point, yeah, be who you are, because it's critical and it's differentiated and it's valued. And for those who don't get it, you need to let them know. And it means something, right? And if it doesn't, it's a bit of a problem. But here, within these walls, it means something. And we're continuing to work forward on it. And I encourage you guys, it's hard sometimes, right? I mean, the question I have is, right, when do you know, right, what if we're all pushing the way, like, hey, make space for everyone, does that look weird, right? We need to find that line. But at the end of the day, I will tell you, as a leader in an organization, it's tremendously impactful when people speak up and say stuff. Makes me think twice. I think I do this pretty well. We got a long way to go. And 20 plus years I grew up before this, it was different. The focus was on they can hang with the guys, cool. And that's wrong. It's just wrong. I don't think I knew how wrong it was until I had an opportunity to do it.
Any other?
Other guys have questions, comment, thank you.
One here and then we'll go to Mike, because he's aggressive.
Well, maybe. I kind of had a twofold question. One was maybe both the men and women who have a sense of their own personal brand, maybe they can share that. I think I've heard that at another conference. I'm kind of working on figuring out what my personal brand is, but in some ways, well, one thing I thought about was, and maybe this is stemming off of the conversation we had about women trying to entertain men. So I like to be nice. I feel happy being nice. And sometimes I thought that was a weakness. I really did. I observed, maybe it was my last company, I observed a lot of the women who were at the top. They were really abrasive. They didn't seem girly. You know, I'm girly, and that's okay. But when I went to a conference, I kind of decided, it felt very freeing. I said, you know what, I'm going to be nice. I'm going to be assertive when I need to be, and I'm going to speak up when I need to be. So maybe what I realized was, and maybe this is me not just imitating a man, but other people, what I realized what I was missing was just speaking up and asking for what I wanted when I wanted it. So I could still be nice, but speaking up and standing up for myself. So I guess I just wanted to hear maybe from both men and women what their personal brands are, and if they think they have an idea of what their personal brand is.
Maybe that's a topic for networking afterwards, in smaller groups, because I think it's a really interesting and very thoughtful.
I love
just said.
and I love the asking yourself the question. If you think, you're like, okay, you start with the thing that comes to your mind, or maybe the thing people have told you a lot,
Yeah.
they think is true about you. And you think about that and you're like, is that who I really am? Like, is that who I make me feel like myself? Am I comfortable? Or am I doing it for a reason? And am I nice because I feel like I don't bring value unless I'm taking care of people? And that it doesn't have to be one or the other, but it requires a bit of reflection. And I was just thinking as you were speaking, Russell, that in some ways, maybe the old school bow tie way of being in a workplace actually wasn't so great for men either. I imagine for the men who loved bow ties, it was fine. I'm sure there were, I mean, there are ways in which, you know, sort of the costumes we wear are meant to deliver a message, and whether it's, in this case, it was in a workplace, and it would, for some people, it might have felt very powerful and synchronous with who they were, and for probably most people, it did not. And that's why there's lots of famous plays about people who felt like they had hollow, meaningless lives, where they put on their suit and tie and went to work. And it seems to me that the goal is to help everybody, to make sure you're cultivating people's sort of authentic selves. It's not their job to send everyone to therapy, but to check in with yourself. Like, why do I keep doing that? Everyone's like, oh, you're so nice. My cab driver told me I was nice on the way here. And I was like, that's weird. So I was like thinking about it, and I was like, why do I have to be nice to the cab driver? He's getting paid. But just checking in, like paying attention, staying awake whenever people reflect things back about you. Don't have to take them at, you know, face value. But like if you've made that impression, check into it and pay a little attention. Be like, okay, what's that about? And why is that? It's not going to be something you figure out right away. Maybe it will be, but probably not. But over time, you're going to build a brand that is real, that's authentic, and it's always a work in progress.
Well, and I think the other thing that you all have a huge opportunity, right? I mean, I can tell you, I never worked for a woman. I actually never worked with a woman. I actually, until I was, I never worked in every place I worked, I hired all the women that they had. I mean, so I never had the opportunity to observe other women doing stuff, except sort of in a broader context, not up close and personal. So I think that's a huge advantage, and you have the opportunity to work with men of a variety of ages and a variety of experiences, and so that brand can come from different places.
So you touched on it a bit, but what, from a talent recruiting point of view, have you done successfully to make diversity and inclusion an actual priority, right? Not someone like Carol who believes in it, but folks maybe who don't believe in it, right? It's not just making like a check-the-box activity and saying, hey, we want to hire women because our numbers are X%, but like making it an actual meaningful thing that's woven into how you operate, how you evaluate talent.
So I was in big companies, and I had the benefit of, I started my career at Ogilvy in Mather, and Shelley Lasseter was the CEO, so I was kind of used to that, and then I got jumped into this telecom world where there were no women. I'm like, where is everybody? Back at Ogilvy in Mather. There were a lot of, and the few women were definitely the women who hang with men well. You know, like that made me think of that. I mean, in my startups, it's really hard because there aren't that many women programmers, but I have my HR guy actively searching that. And, you know, we're always trying to proactively find women. We've gone to different colleges, we recruit with that focus, but the talent pool isn't, I mean, it's hard. Although my management team has 2 women on it, so we're an anomaly. I mean, even if you have the female CEO, usually you have all men on your management team. So, and that was not really by design.
So in the opposite, so I'm always trying to attract men to Big Sister. And we just hired the vice president of development, which is fundraising. So he has to go out there and talk about why girls matter and why it's important, the work that we do, and convince people to give money to an organization that's just focused on girls. It has to go to a lot of men to say, why is this important? And same with the board. So we've been able to do that by really getting men to see that they're part of the solution. That we're going to men who are saying they want more women in their workplace, they want to get more brokers at their firm, and so they're coming onto our board to show women that they're trying to recruit. And look what I'm doing. I'm on board of Big Sister because I believe, you know, in giving women a chance. So
The most effective thing I ever did was I had an executive dinner at my home, and I invited all the guys and their wives. And I brought up the question of why did the wives think that we didn't have more women? in the executive branch. They were hiring them in droves. Very effective.
But don't you think it is about the culture too?
Absolutely.
Because I would say, I'm in the same boat as you, where in child psychiatry, it's actually, there's a lot of women in mental health and not a lot of men. We're trying to have a balanced team. And in some ways it's about the dynamics of the team, but it's also about clinical care. Is about the way we communicate with one another and actually having a culture where we're not afraid of conflict a little bit. There's like safe, civilized rules of engagement, but that we have to be comfortable with disagreement and that we expect people to come prepared. Like that that it's a lot about the culture, and then that I think helps also make you live diversity a little bit better. Because it's really diversity of perspective, of style, of thought, that then, on its face can look like diversity of gender and race and religion, but it's more, I think, about that, the diversity of like who is actually sitting around that table, maybe making a better product.
And just to make one comment, sort of globally, to Mike's point and to some other things. The other thing that comes to mind is my oldest son just graduated from the Harvard Business School a year ago. And I got the call every mother once, his first year there, which was, Mom, they're having a celebration of 50 years of women at the Harvard Business School, and there's an exhibit. And I walked in the exhibit, and I realized you were a early adopter. And I'd like, would you come to dinner with me and go to the exhibit? Whatever I was doing Thursday night, gone. We went to the exhibit, we went to dinner, and I think what, to your question and to the question of others, is what he said to me, until I got here, I never realized there was a problem. All your friends were from the Harvard Business School, all your friends worked, and he said, and he looked at this exhibit, and he really was overwhelmed, right? Because in his world, it had never been different. And so I think that's the real answer, is when all of us look at the world and we don't even think about whether someone's a female or they're foreign or they're, dark or they're light or they're loud or they're aggressive or they're whatever they are, but they're a person who's adding tremendous value in this organization and has a brand and has some, to me, that is the goal. And it's really about having people get their heads around the fact that you don't all have to be the same. In fact, you're not the same. The answer's better. So, and I believe that from my heart. I believe that from my heart. It's why Barry and I are here. We're adding age diversity. Other questions?
So a lot of the talk we've had so far is about women overcoming the challenges they may face with competing against men or judgment from men. But a lot of times that also might come from other women or competing with other women. Are the strategies to, I guess, compete that the same for, doing that with women versus men?
I think that's great.
So I'll just quote Madeline Albright, who says there's a special hell for women that don't help other women. And again, if you see that bad behavior, call it out. And just be like, what did you just do? You need to be supporting this person, right?
So if you go to leadership conferences and you hear women, and they'll often say, I don't like working for a woman. You'll hear it over and over again, right? So it's self-sabotage.
And and women don't have to help other women just because they're women, but you want women in leadership to be helping all of their employees because of what their strengths are and because they're part of the team and they're committed. They think they have the critical ingredients and they're going to make it work. But at the same time, when you notice, this happens in medicine a lot, where women that achieve leadership, the ones that I have worked with, Carol was like a blessing to me, a woman, although you weren't from medicine, who was gender blind, who was an advocate for the people that she worked with because she thought they were talented. And the women that I had worked under were very nurturing, maternal, and then as soon as you rose up to a certain level, oh my God. It was like you just got cut off at the knees. It was like alien. It was crazy. And it took a while to even recognize it because it didn't sort of jive with the maternal thing. It was very common in medicine, where I think there was also a different kind of acculturation, but you really had to run with the boys and with women of a certain age in medicine. So calling it out, and I think this is easier said than done. Having difficult conversations with people at different levels of power and authority is really challenging. And sometimes it's not smart to have a direct assault kind of conversation. So being smart, like.
Plus it's generational too. I've heard some young women who say to me that, you know, I'm working for a woman that's a baby boomer, and she's telling me that I have to do this, this, and this, I have to work hard, and I have to model the way that she got there. And I don't think I should have to, so I coach them to say, you need to have that conversation. You need to talk about that. It's not easy, but I just want to say the system was set up for women to fight with other women, because the White House is only one spot, and it happens to that women of color and men of color. Right? Because minorities have never been in that position of power. The system is set up so that then we start competing against each other. Just one.
That's very true.
Well, we've held you here a long time.
If you are working for an organization that is probably less progressive, but they're interested parties in evolving into a more inclusive environment, besides the small, I don't work here. Besides the small working group of, at this point, women trying to get something started, what ways do you think it's best to start to approach and convince senior management that are very much good old boys that, you know, it's time to evolve along with the rest of your peer group?
So I think Russell should take that person out to lunch. The things that he's done and all the great benefits, and I mean, I think it is a strategic initiative that's going to take lots of fronts and lots of conversations and lots of different people from outside the company, probably.
They want to change though.
Yeah, that's true.
It's huge. Culture is so huge to change.
Yeah. It does seem like you have to pay attention to what can I do, and what's the degree to which I might be able to show then tell, like show how you bring value and then point it out that you've brought value and how come that hasn't been recognized. And then also to have a sense of when is it not gonna when is it not gonna produce any returns? When do you need to go sit at a different table?
Yeah, I know personally I've always been